Disarm her. Now, the order cracked through the training grounds haze. 6 of the program's most feared instructors moved in on the woman they'd labeled a clerical error. The next 58 seconds would redefine everything they knew about combat. The bus hissed to a stop at the gates of Fort Yeager, a place known to its unwilling residents only as the Crucible. Heat radiated from the asphalt in shimmering waves, distorting the air and the faces of the 20 candidates who shuffled out into the oppressive sun. They all wore the same look, a cocktail of bravado and terror, jaws tight, eyes scanning the razor wire and guard towers that promised to break them down and, maybe, build them back up. All except one. From a shaded observation deck, Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thorne watched the new arrivals. His face, weathered and creased like old leather, fixed on a single figure who didn't belong. She wasn't wearing the standard issue prep gear. Instead of tactical boots, she wore worn-down leatherwork boots. Instead of a sweat-wicking athletic shirt, she had on a faded black t-shirt for a rock band Thorne had never heard of. She moved with a placid economy, her steps measured, her posture relaxed. It wasn't arrogance and it wasn't fear. It was a profound, unnerving stillness. Who the hell is that? Thorne grunted to the junior instructor beside him. The instructor checked his datapad. Kess, Eden. Files thin, Gunny. Almost empty. Thorne narrowed his eyes. He'd built his reputation on sniffing out weakness, on finding the single loose thread that would unravel a candidate. But this woman, she wasn't a thread, she was a void. Down on the ground, Private Maya Castillo felt a prickle on the back of her neck. Growing up in a crowded city, she'd learned to read people on subways, to see the predators and the prey in a single glance. And the woman standing a few feet away, Eden Kess, set off every alarm she had. It was in the way her eyes didn't just look, but scanned. She wasn't taking in the sights. She was mapping sight lines, calculating angles, noting the glint of mirrored glass on the command tower. She moved like someone returning to a familiar, dangerous place. Hours later, in a sterile, climate-controlled office, Major Evelyn Reed stared at that same file on her screen. 7 pages of almost nothing. Vague postings, no commendations, no disciplinary actions. It was the file of a ghost. But at the very bottom, under a redacted security clearance section, was a 2-word flag she'd never seen on an active candidate's record. Ghost Protocol. Reed leaned back, her perfectly coiled gray bun feeling tight against her scalp. Ghost Protocol wasn't a clearance level. It was a failsafe. A designation for operatives so deep undercover that their official records were wiped clean to protect operations that, on paper, never happened. It was a file meant to be buried, not activated. She toggled to the emergency contact field. It wasn't blank. It was a single, stark word, archived. A cold dread trickled down her spine. You didn't archive a living person's emergency contact. You archived a file when the subject was presumed dead. She pulled up the live feed from the training grounds. There was Kess, standing in formation, listening to Thorne's welcoming speech, a tirade of threats and insults designed to intimidate. But Kess wasn't intimidated. She was perfectly still, absorbing the verbal onslaught like a stone wall absorbs the wind. Reed zoomed in on her face. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were ancient. "What are you?" Reed whispered to the screen. The system she trusted, the world of rules and regulations she commanded, had just been breached by a ghost. And the ghost was now in the lion's den. The first week at the Crucible was a symphony of controlled chaos designed to strip away ego. And Gunnery Sergeant Thorne was its conductor, his baton a torrent of verbal abuse. He prowled the obstacle courses and firing ranges, a predator savoring the fear of new prey. He lived for the moment a candidate's confidence finally shattered. Eden Kess gave him nothing. She was his primary target from the first drill, but his insults slid off her like rain off glass. She was clumsy on the rope climb, slow on the timed runs, and awkward during drill formations. Yet, her failures were never dramatic. They were quiet, methodical, and always just below the passing standard. It was infuriating. The breaking point for Maya Castillo's curiosity came during weapons maintenance. The task was simple. Field strip the XR 17 scimitar rifle, clean it, and reassemble it against the clock. The scimitar was a new, complex piece of hardware, and the barracks filled with the sounds of grunts, curses, and the clatter of dropped parts. Eden approached the rifle with a feigned hesitation, as if it were an alien artifact. She fumbled with the receiver pins, her movements slow and uncertain. Thorn loomed over her, a smug grin plastered on his face. "What's the matter, Kess? Afraid you'll break a nail?" But Maya, watching from 2 benches down, saw something else. She saw through the performance. While Eden's face showed confusion, her hands told a different story. Her fingers found the hidden latches without searching. Her thumbs applied pressure to the exact points needed to release the bolt carrier group with a practice nudge. When a spring slipped from her grasp, her other hand was already moving to catch it before it hit the floor, a reflex too fast to be accidental. It wasn't knowledge from a manual. It was muscle memory, thousands of hours of repetition carved into her very nerves. She finished in just under 12 minutes, well within the time limit, but far from impressive. She reassembled the rifle with the same theatrical struggle, giving a final, frustrated sigh as she slid the bolt home. "Barely competent, Kess," Thorn sneered, marking his data pad. As usual, Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Eden wasn't struggling. She was calibrating. She was deliberately performing at the lowest possible level of acceptance. Hiding. But why? The answer began to reveal itself at the firing range. The objective was standard qualification. 5 shots at a target 300 meters away. The desert wind was a fickle enemy, and most recruits struggled, their shots scattering across the paper like buckshot. Thorn positioned himself directly behind Eden, his voice a loud, condescending drawl for the benefit of the entire line. "All right, Kess. Try to point it in the right direction. The big, sandy part is the ground. Don't shoot that." Eden settled into her stance. To the untrained eye, it was textbook. To Maya, it was something more. It was perfect. Her breathing was a slow, rhythmic cadence. She raised the scimitar, her cheek welled seamless. She didn't fight the rifle. She became part of it. She fired 5 shots. The reports were evenly spaced, each one followed by a moment of absolute stillness as she reset. "Pop, pause, pop, pause. Cease fire. Bring him in." Thorn bellowed. The targets sped back along their tracks. Most were riddled with holes, a testament to the difficulty of the drill. Then Eden's target arrived. Silence fell over the firing line. It wasn't 5 holes. It wasn't even a tight grouping. It was one hole. A single, ragged opening, perfectly centered in the bullseye. 5 rounds had passed through the exact same point in space. The master range instructor, a man who had trained sniper teams for 20 years, went pale. He walked over, picked up the paper, and held it to the light. He'd seen shooting like this only twice before. Both times, the shooters were considered legends within communities that didn't officially exist. Thorn stared at the hole, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. He snatched the paper, held it up, and then scoffed, forcing a laugh. "Well, look at that. Even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while. Don't get used to it, Kess. That's all the luck you're getting." He crumpled the target and tossed it in a bin, walking away before anyone could question him. He had to believe it was luck. The alternative, that this quiet, unimpressive woman possessed a skill level that bordered on supernatural, was a truth his world couldn't contain. But Maya knew. It wasn't luck. It was a warning. And she had the terrifying feeling that no one was listening. The hand-to-hand combat pit was Thorn's personal kingdom. He taught a style based on brute force and intimidation. His demonstrations less about technique and more about asserting dominance. He'd slam a 200-pound recruit into the mat and stand over them, chest puffed out, daring anyone to see it as anything other than a lesson. Eden's turn came against a hulking former wrestler named Gallo, who outweighed her by a good 80 pounds. Thorn gave Gallo a subtle nod, a silent instruction to make it hurt. "All right, Kess," Thorn barked. "Standard takedown. Let's see if you can even manage that." Eden moved in, her posture hesitant, her technique a perfect, by-the-book imitation of the clumsy move Thorn had just shown them. Gallo braced for the impact, a smirk on his face. But the impact never came in the way he expected. Just as she made contact, Eden's hips shifted with imperceptible speed. Her grip adjusted by millimeters. It wasn't a push. It was a redirection of Gallo's own momentum. He found himself airborne, landing flat on his back with a loud thud that knocked the wind out of him. He lay there, staring at the sky, completely bewildered. "Sloppy Kess, use your strength," Thorne yelled, either blind to the surgical precision of the move or willfully ignorant. "You got lucky he was off balance." Eden just nodded. "Yes, Sergeant." That night, Maya Castillo couldn't sleep. She replayed the takedown in her mind. It wasn't a textbook move. It was cleaner, faster, a different system entirely. A system designed not for winning a sparring match, but for ending a fight in the most efficient way possible. She went to the base's digital archives and searched for advanced combat systems. She found a heavily redacted file on a defunct program called CQC, Close Quarters Combat Extreme. The core principle wasn't leverage in the traditional sense. It was skeletal alignment and nervous system targeting. The file was locked, but the one-line description was enough. It was exactly what she had seen Eden do. Thorne's obsession with breaking Eden grew with each passing day. He assigned her the worst duties, criticized her every move, and tried to bait her into an emotional reaction. But she remained a placid lake, her calm surface reflecting his own growing frustration back at him. Her constant, monotone refrain of "Yes, Sergeant," and "Understood, Sergeant" was more unnerving than any outburst would have been. She was giving him no anger, no fear, no weakness to exploit. She was an unclassifiable entity, and it was driving him mad. He needed to prove to himself, and to the other recruits, that she was a fraud. The moment came at the end of the third week. Thorne gathered the entire company under the harsh glare of the floodlights. His shadow stretched long and menacing across the dusty parade ground. "Tomorrow, we separate the contenders from the contaminants," he announced, his voice echoing in the cold night air. "We run a little drill we call the Gauntlet. It's a final exam, a test of everything you've learned. The scenario is simple. One of you against 6 of our finest instructors. Survive for 60 seconds, and you pass." A nervous murmur rippled through the ranks. This wasn't a drill. It was a public execution. Thorne's eyes scanned the crowd and locked onto Eden. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across his face. "Kess, your performance has been underwhelming. You've struggled with the most basic competencies. So, we're going to give you a chance to shine. Tomorrow at 0800, you're first in the gauntlet. 1 on 6. No resets. No excuses." The murmuring stopped. The silence was absolute, thick with shock. This was beyond a test. This was a personal, public humiliation, sanctioned and delivered with a grin. Maya's stomach turned to ice. She looked at Eden, expecting to see fear, or at least despair. Instead, she saw something that terrified her more than anything Thorne had ever done. Eden Kess smiled. It wasn't a smile of defiance or sarcasm. It was a quiet, eerie look of contentment. The look of someone who had been waiting patiently for a specific, inevitable moment to arrive. It was the look of a storm that had finally been given permission to break. By 0745, the main training pit at the Crucible felt like a Roman Colosseum. Word had spread like wildfire. It wasn't just the new recruits. Soldiers from every corner of Fort Yeager had found an excuse to be there. Medics stood by with trauma kits, their expressions grim. Officers lined the upper gantries, arms folded, their faces a mixture of curiosity and morbid anticipation. In her office, Major Evelyn Reed watched the gathering on her monitor, the Ghost Protocol file still open. An archival flag on a living candidate. It defied all logic. She had spent a sleepless night running Eden's name through every classified database she could access, hitting one encrypted wall after another. Whatever Kess was, she was buried deeper than any secret Reed had ever encountered. Down in the pit, the 6 instructors chosen for the gauntlet stretched casually. They were Thorne's elite, the best hand-to-hand specialists on the base. There was Gallo, the wrestler, hungry for payback. There was Viper, a wiry specialist in submission holds. Rhino, a mountain of muscle who specialized in blunt force trauma. 2 more, Static and Breach, were masters of coordinated attacks. And leading them was a man known only as Jax, Thorne's quiet, brutally efficient second-in-command. They moved with the lazy confidence of apex predators who knew the outcome was already decided. Then, Eden Kess emerged from the equipment bay. The low chatter around the pit died. Her walk was different. The feigned uncertainty was gone. Every step was centered, precise, her body a coiled spring of potential energy. She wasn't a candidate walking to a test. She was a warrior walking to her domain. She wore the same faded band t-shirt, but now she methodically rolled up the sleeves to her elbows. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Her forearms were a roadmap of violence. A latticework of pale, silvery scars crisscrossed her skin. The puckered divots of old bullet wounds. The clean, straight lines of a surgeon's scalpel. The jagged memory of shrapnel. These weren't training injuries. This was the record of a life lived on the edge of death. On the monitor in her office, Major Reed zoomed in. Her blood ran cold. Near Eden's left elbow, barely visible but unmistakable, was a small tattoo. 6 parallel vertical lines, with a 7th line slashed horizontally through them. It was the unofficial unit marker for Echo Division, a phantom unit that had been officially disbanded and disavowed 5 years ago after a catastrophic mission went public in the worst way. They were the ghosts, the deniable assets sent to do the impossible. The 7 cross line meant something specific. Sole survivor. My God. Reed breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. She's not a candidate. She's a relic. Thorne stepped into the center of the pit, a whistle in his hand, his face a mask of smug authority. No weapons, no eye gouging. You stay standing or you surrender. Any last words, Kess? Eden turned her head, her gaze locking onto his. For the first time since she'd arrived, her voice was not quiet or submissive. It was clear, steady, and carried across the silent arena with the weight of cold steel. Just one question, Gunnery Sergeant, she said, her tone devoid of emotion. When this is over, will you finally admit you never knew what you were looking at? The whistle shrieked, a piercing sound that seemed to hang in the dead air. The 6 instructors exploded into motion, their strategy clear, a multi-vector assault to overwhelm and crush. Rhino charged straight ahead, a 250-pound battering ram aimed at Eden's center mass. Static and Breach fanned out to her flanks, cutting off any retreat. Viper and Gallows circled behind, preparing to exploit any opening. Jax, the strategist, held back, directing the attack. Rhino was 3 feet away, his shoulder lowered for the kill shot, when Eden moved. She didn't retreat. She didn't even dodge. She took a single, short step to her left and pivoted on the ball of her foot. It was a movement so economical, so fluid, it was almost imperceptible. Rhino's momentum carried him past her into empty space. As he thundered by, Eden's hand shot out, not in a punch, but with an open palm. Her fingers struck the side of his neck, just below the ear, at the cluster of nerves that controlled balance. It wasn't a blow, it was a biological command. Rhino's legs tangled, his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed into a heap, his massive body hitting the dust like a sack of cement. 5 seconds before Static and Breach could process what had happened. She was moving toward them. They attacked simultaneously, a pincer movement that had never failed. But they were attacking where she had been. She flowed between them like water, her hands a blur. A precise elbow strike to Static's floating rib sent a shockwave of agony through his body, making him gasp and fold. A sweeping leg kick, delivered not with power but with perfect timing to the back of Breach's knee, buckled his leg at an unnatural angle. He went down with a scream of pain and surprise. 14 seconds. Gallo, seeing his chance, lunged for her back. He was the wrestler. On the ground, she was finished. His arms wrapped around her waist, but it was like trying to grab smoke. Eden's hips dropped, her center of gravity vanishing beneath his. She used his own grip to spin under his arm, ending up behind him. Her forearm slid under his chin, not for a choke, but to apply pressure to his carotid artery. Gallo struggled for a moment, his face turning purple, before his body went limp. She laid him gently on the ground. 26 seconds. Viper, the submission expert, hesitated for a fatal fraction of a second. He saw not a candidate, but a phantom dismantling his team with terrifying precision. He feinted high, then shot low for her legs. Eden didn't back away. She moved forward, stomping her foot down hard on his ankle just as he committed his weight to it. There was a sickening crunch. Viper howled, his attack forgotten as he clutched his shattered ankle. 39 seconds. Only Jax remained, the silent, deadly leader. He stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. He wasn't looking at an opponent anymore. He was looking at something that defied his entire understanding of combat. This wasn't a fight. It was a dissection. Eden walked toward him, her footsteps silent in the dust. She stopped 10 feet away. She didn't raise her fists. She just waited. Jax looked at his fallen comrades, then back at the woman standing before him. He saw the cold, clear certainty in her eyes. He was a professional killer, but she was something else entirely. She was an extinction-level event in human form. He slowly raised his hands, palms open. "I yield," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper that was swallowed by the vast, stunned silence of the Colosseum. 58 seconds. The whistle had never blown for the end of the match. It didn't need to. Thorne stood paralyzed, his face ashen, the whistle dangling from his lips. The smugness, the cruelty, the absolute certainty. It had all been stripped away, leaving only the raw, naked face of a man who had just witnessed the impossible. He had poked a sleeping dragon, and it had opened one eye. The silence that followed was more profound than any noise. 200 soldiers stood motionless, their minds struggling to reconcile the 58 seconds of surgical violence they had just witnessed with the quiet, awkward woman they had ridiculed for weeks. The world had been turned upside down. The laws of physics and power had been rewritten before their eyes. Then, a single sound broke the spell. Clap. It was Maya Castillo. She stood alone, her hands coming together slowly at first, then with more force. Clap, clap, clap. Another soldier joined in, then a dozen more, then the entire assembly. It wasn't the roar of a crowd celebrating a sports victory. It was a wave of thunderous, solemn applause. It was an ovation of awe and recognition. They weren't clapping for a recruit who had passed a test. They were acknowledging a truth they had been too blind to see. They had been in the presence of greatness and had mistaken it for weakness. Eden paid them no mind. She walked over to each of the fallen instructors, her touch now clinical and gentle. She checked on Breach's knee, repositioned Rhino's head to ensure his airway was clear. Her duty done, she picked up a towel, wiped the dust from her face, and walked out of the pit with the same unhurried grace she'd had on the day she arrived. Thorne was still frozen in place, a statue of shattered pride. His authority had been dismantled more completely than his elite team. He was no longer a lion, just a man who had learned the terrible difference between a cage and the wild. Within 2 hours, Eden Kess was gone. No formal discharge, no ceremony. Her bunk was empty, her file wiped from the Fort Yeager system. Major Reed received a single, encrypted message on her terminal. It read, "Asset reassigned. Incident file classified Tier 0. You will not speak of this." Tier 0 was a classification that didn't officially exist. It meant forget this ever happened. But no one forgot. The security footage of those 58 seconds became the most guarded secret on the base, a ghost story whispered about by new recruits for years to come. The legend of Eden Kess became a cautionary tale, a redefinition of what deadly truly looked like. It wasn't about shouting the loudest or puffing out your chest. True strength didn't need to advertise. It walked in quietly, wearing a faded t-shirt, and waited patiently to rewrite the rules. Eden showed her strength without saying a word. What do you think is more powerful, the strength you project or the strength you hold in reserve? Share your thoughts below, and, as always, let's comment with respect for everyone's perspective. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that uncover the truth.